RPG, role-playing game. A game in which players take on the roles of imaginary characters who engage in adventures. The term was coined by Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm sure you've heard of it. Just as the Lord of the Rings trilogy pioneered the fantasy genre as a whole, we can gladly thank Dungeons & Dragons for pioneering and popularizing the role-playing genre. Originally a tabletop paper and pen dice rolling game centered around a rulebook encouraging player creativity, its open-ended nature led players into creating their own fantasy settings with detailed histories, magics, and characters. Since its inception in 1974, it has inspired game developers all across the globe in creating these richly developed universes for gamers to enjoy. Fantasy RPGs have traditionally been a niche thing, something for nerds to do in their basements on weekends, something a normal person would never admit to. Computer RPGs in the late 90s to early 2000s followed suit. It wasn't until The Elder Scrolls Oblivion in 2006 that RPGs hit the mainstream console market and really captured the average gamer, proving that it isn't just a form of escapism for losers and geeks. However, the mainstream success of RPGs in recent years hasn't come without its own drawbacks. Many of the main surface-level mechanics from CRPGs of yore still remain. Things like experience points, leveling up, dialogue systems, character progression, and attribute point allocation. However, quite a few things have been either added, removed, or diluted, not all of which, in my opinion, are to its advantage. But there are still developers out there keeping the original design philosophies of old-school CRPGs alive. Pillars of Eternity, Wasteland 2, and of course, Divinity: Original Sin. From someone who made a video titled Why Divinity: Original Sin is the Best Thing, you can tell I was pretty excited for this game before its release. What do I think now that I've actually played it? It's freaking awesome, dude! Dude, you can play as a skeleton lizard. A skeleton lizard. You can eat severed legs to access people's memories and get special skills. You can turn people into chickens. The amount of crazy stuff you can do in this game is unparalleled. It harkens back to the Dungeons & Dragons tradition of doing whatever the freak you want as long as you have enough skill. The world is a sandbox just waiting for you to dive in and experiment with its mechanics. For example, your first main objective in the game is to escape a prison, and you can go about this in several different ways. I won't spoil them for fear of ruining the sense of discovery gained from forging your own way, but needless to say, there's a lot of variety in accomplishing your goals in this game. If you can think of it, there's probably a way to pull it off. This game has a lot of logic-based puzzles, and its systemic design allows you to approach them in many different ways. One thing I was really impressed by was this game's dialogue system. If The Witcher 3's dialogue is like watching a great movie, then Divinity: Original Sin 2's dialogue is like reading a dense novel. Every piece of text in the game is brilliant in the way it encapsulates you and brings about vivid imagery. The first game didn't even come close to this level of writing and dialogue choices. The writing in general has taken on a very different tone from the first game. While the first game was all about tongue-in-cheek humor and fourth wall breakage, this game takes itself a lot more seriously. Sure, there's a glimmer of humor every now and again, but I've run into more dogs with sad backstories than I'd like to think about. It's up to you to decide whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. Personally, I appreciate the greater attention given to world building, lore, and atmosphere, but I do miss the hilarity of the writing from the first game. The role-playing aspect of this role-playing game is very much alive and well. It's been a long time since I've played a game with such detailed and diverse dialogue options, allowing me to craft and perfect every single aspect of the character I want to play as. I'm not much of a preparatory role player, i.e. planning every aspect of your character out before you even start the game, but I can see great potential for that kind of experience if you are one of those people. There's a metric butt-ton of diverse character builds, each with lots of unique skills, abilities, and attributes to play around with. The origin characters are an interesting addition. Basically, there are a few pre-made characters with set backstories and skills you can choose to play as, complete with their own additional quests and voice acting. If you choose to play a custom character, you can add these characters to your party, but I can't help feel like I'm missing out on something by not playing as them. This is the kind of game you really should play more than once, because chances are you'll miss out on a huge chunk of content your first time through, either because you didn't find it or as a result of your choices. This game isn't afraid of blocking off content if you made the wrong choice or messed something up. The game doesn't hold your hand and tell you exactly what to do for every situation, but it does provide you with everything you need to make a good choice. That isn't to say that this game is a walk in the park, however. Getting lost and confused seems like a regular part of the gameplay. The solutions to the puzzles make sense when you think about them after the fact, but are pretty cryptic when you're actually trying to solve them. One mechanic that confused me almost as much as it infuriated me was the way it handles the turn part of the turn-based combat. It makes no sense. The order of you and the enemy's turns, as well as their frequency, is dependent on a number of factors that leave the system feeling convoluted. Sometimes it feels like your character gets almost no opportunities to fight back, as your enemies just get turn after turn after turn, decimating your entire party by the time you actually get to do anything. Though the general formula of the first game has remained largely the same, there have been some improvements and changes. For example, the new armor system means that your armor values matter to a much higher degree. Armor, both magical and physical, acts as a shield for enemy attacks, kind of like a second health pool. As soon as your armor is depleted, you actually start to take damage. This goes for enemies as well, as you have to break through either their magical or physical armor before you can damage them. This system takes some getting used to, but it means that you actually see the difference armor makes, unlike most games where it just adds a certain intangible percentage of protection. The maximum amount of action points you can use in combat has been reduced, but actions take less AP to execute. In the first game, the balance of the weapons came from the fact that they use different amounts of AP. A one-handed weapon, for example, would generally use 3 AP for a standard attack, and a two-handed weapon would use 4 to 5. A bow would use 4, and a crossbow would use 5. In this game, however, most of the weapons just use 2 AP for a standard attack. This was an interesting design decision to make, as this means making sure that all the weapons feel balanced is a lot more complicated. I feel that the new armor system complements these changes. For example, two-handed weapons deal more damage and have more range, but you aren't able to use a shield while using them. Vice versa, you can use a shield while wielding a one-handed weapon, but they deal less damage and have less range. You can now carry a sleeping bag around with you to rest and heal your party whenever you're out of combat. This is way better than the first game system of you having to teleport back to town to find a bed to sleep in whenever you need to heal your party but didn't want to use all of your healing potions. There are a lot of general time savers like that, and they're appreciated. Though it's important to realize that this sequel seeks to improve upon what worked in the first game, not build it from the ground up. If you didn't like what the first game had to offer, don't expect your opinion to change this time around. However, if you're like me and were giddy to find out that this game simply offers more of what you loved in the first game, go crazy, cause this is as good as it gets. While Pillars of Eternity may stick completely to its roots in games like Baldur's Gate, Divinity Original Sin 2 isn't afraid of adding new things to the formula. Despite this, the game also offers a lot of extra goodies for fans of old-school Dungeons & Dragons, because there's a GM mode where you or your friends build a D&D-esque campaign to go through, complete with everything you could want from something like that. It's something that will keep hardcore fans of tabletop RPGs coming back to this game for a long time coming. You know, if you have friends. I don't have friends to play this with. So, in conclusion, Divinity Original Sin 2 is the best thing since Divinity Original Sin 1. It's a must-have for any and all who enjoy classic PC RPGs, and I have no doubt that its replayability and creativity will keep this game feeling fresh for decades to come. If you enjoyed the first game or enjoy tabletop role-playing games in general, you can't go wrong with Divinity Original Sin 2. My name is JaBoc, and may we meet again.